1 week ago, my wife and I moved into a gated community called Bravero, one of those cutout paradises with an aesthetic so vivid in photos, yet anemic in reality. After living there for 2 days, we moved to a hotel. It'll be our home for the foreseeable future. We just need to sell the property and find a new one. Anything. Anywhere. Far from Bravero. That's the only requirement. The nefarious nature of that place only became apparent once the street's rule had been broken. No laughing after dark. "Honey," I called, chuckling. "What?" my wife replied from the other room. "Get in here and see this," I said. Rowan strolled into the lobby with a beam on her face, still intoxicated by our new home. She rubbed a loving hand down my back, tracing the curvature of my spine. "What's got you smirking, Owen?" she asked. "This," I said, proudly displaying the leaflet that I'd found on the doormat. Rowan leaned forward and read it alongside me. "Dear Owen and Rowan, this is Irene from the Bravero HOA. Welcome to day 1 of your new life in this safe, vibrant community. You've already met Gordon, our resident security guard, so you'll know that safety is of the utmost importance to us. The vibrancy of this community is apparent, but it extends beyond superb landscaping and house-proud homeowners. It is the people who make this street vibrant. Parties and events, such as our regular garden gatherings and film nights, make this truly a place to call home. However, I do think it prudent to inform you of one particular rule that, without exception, will be enforced. There must be no laughing after dark. This is not a matter of noise. We understand that all residents will want to watch TV, listen to music, or simply talk. Noise is an unavoidable part of life, but laughter between sunset and sunrise is strictly prohibited in Bravero. What constitutes after dark? There is no specific time at which laughter must cease. After all, the sun sets around 4 o'clock in winter and nearly 10 o'clock at the height of summer. Moreover, there is a window of murkiness between day and night. You might be wondering when to keep quiet. If you want my advice, Mr. and Mrs. Neville, I would suggest that you not risk laughing once the day's light starts to fade, once the sun starts to creep close to the horizon. For this is not a rule enforced in a black and white manner. It is not even a rule enforced by the HOA itself. Aside from that, there is nothing to bear in mind. I do not run an oppressive association. You've already read and signed the contract. You know how we operate. Grow your hedges as tall as you wish. Paint your front door a garish color. Walk the streets after midnight if you so wish. Just do not laugh after dark. I told you I didn't want to live with rich people. They're unhinged, my wife said. No laughing after dark? What sort of dystopian nonsense is that? I hate moving. There's always something that the estate agent fails to mention. Some catch with every too-good-to-be-true property, I sighed. Sure. There was a broken dishwasher in the first place. The busted taps are in second place. The oven fell loose in the third place. Issues that the agents and homeowners should have mentioned, Rowan said. But I thought we were past all of that, Owen. I thought buying a house at such a sickening price meant that we'd be able to forego absurd problems. And this is worse than any of the issues in our old houses because we won't even be able to fix the problem. Of course we will. We shall become joyless husks, my dear wife, I sarcastically teased, maintaining a straight face as I embraced Rowan. For there is no laughter in Bravero. This is a place of principles. Of sincerity, I say. Go forth, my wench, and prepare me a sandwich in the kitchen. My wife offered a blank face. There's no need to worry. No chance of laughing with you around. I could tell, by the look on her lips, that Rowan wanted to chortle. So did I. But, despite our sarcastic responses to the letter, my wife and I were still drawn to the setting sun beyond the window. And I knew we were thinking the same thing. It would be moronic not to follow the rule for the first night, at least. I sensed that my wife felt just as uneasy as me, felt as if this were more than HOA authoritarianism. Given how lax they seemed on all other fronts, the one rule was unsettling. Why laughter? Why does that sound above all others? The sound of joy itself. It was too late to do anything on the first evening. I decided I would discuss the letter with the HOA chief the following day. I rang as soon as I woke up. "Owen Neville, so wonderful to receive a call from you." Irene heartily laughed the next morning. "How was your first night in Brave Row?" "It was good," I uncertainly replied. "Irene, I'm calling you about the welcome letter." "Ah, I see. Did everything make sense?" she asked warmly, yet obliviously. I frowned before realizing the woman hadn't seen my face on the other end of the phone. "Well, it was relatively straightforward. There wasn't much to digest, but one thing befuddled the two of us: the rule about laughter." Irene did not pause, and her bubbly tone did not falter. "Yes, no laughing after dark, that's all. I did explain how to interpret after dark. There is no exact cutoff point, no moment at which day becomes night. Do you understand?" I sighed. "It's not about that, Irene. It's about the nature of the rule itself. Does it not seem a little totalitarian to you? I'd understand a rule such as no noise after 11 in the evening. But a rule about not laughing after dark is so oddly specific, and it doesn't seem warranted. I don't see why laughing would ever be worse than other noises that neighbors could make." I paused, but Irene said nothing, so I continued. "Plus, as you mentioned in the letter, the sun sets early in winter. Are you seriously suggesting that, on Christmas Day, to give an example, Rowan and I wouldn't be able to have a joyous time with our family after, say, 3 or 4 in the afternoon?" "Not at all, Mr. Neville. Be as joyous as you want throughout the year," Irene gasped. "I'm only saying that you wouldn't be able to laugh after dark, not until the sun rises once more." I grumbled in frustration. I have to say I'm more than frustrated to be learning of this rule after finalizing the contract. "Did you not talk to the letting agent about Brave Row's HOA before purchasing the property, Mr. Neville?" Irene asked. "Yes," I spat. "I signed your association's agreement, and there was no mention of this rule in there. I know because I read it again this morning. So, this isn't legally enforceable." "You're right, Mr. Neville. It isn't legally enforceable," Irene replied. I huffed anxiously. "Right. So, did I mention anything about a possible breach of our contract?" Irene interrupted. "Did I mention anything about the consequence of breaking the rule? Did I mention, for example, anything about seizing the property should you not comply?" "Well, no," I said. "But what's the point of making a rule that you wouldn't be able to enforce?" "As I mentioned in the letter, Mr. Neville, I'm not the one who enforces it," Irene replied. "The HOA didn't make the rule. We simply inform." "I see," I muttered through clenched teeth, tiring of the irritatingly cheery busybody. "So, what would be the consequence of my wife or I deciding to laugh after dark?" For the first time in our entire conversation, Irene fell silent. Hesitated for a moment. Longer than a moment, in fact. It was her only sign of humanity throughout the call, the only sign that she was more than a pre-programmed series of chipper, dismissive statements. "This is an amazing neighborhood, Mr. Neville," Irene solemnly said. "The 50 residents of Brave Row lead happy lives, and I hope you join them. I truly do. But we have all had to sacrifice something for such peace, such security from the outside world. And that something is laughter, Mr. Neville. But only during those dark hours of the day." "That's not an answer, Irene," I said. "What would be the consequence?" "I wish you'd known the few poor souls who received an answer," Irene replied coldly. "If you had, you wouldn't be asking questions. You'd not dare to laugh ever again." The curt woman, whose jolly demeanor had entirely dissipated, abruptly ended the call, and I was left sitting in my study for the rest of the day, ignoring messages from my boss and co-workers, not only refusing to work, but refusing to move. That may seem a little extreme, but you'd understand my reaction if you'd overheard that call. If you'd lived on the street of Bravero for a mere 2 days, as my wife and I did. By the haunted look in Rowan's eyes, it was clear that she, like me, felt something. A foreboding ripple in the air felt and smelt like rotten breath. I felt it a day earlier when we unloaded our belongings from the moving van. The sense that something hid within Bravero. A watcher. "Hello?" Joanne called again, chuckling. "Won't she stop?" I mumbled, clutching clumps of my hair. "Come on," Rowan whimpered, clumsily plucking a blue gingham dress from the rack. She'll take this, leave, and then we'll leave too. Okay?" I nodded, stepping in front of my wife and taking the dress from her. Then we walked across the landing, like weary prisoners on death row. I tentatively peered over the banister at Joanne, the smiling woman donning turquoise scrubs that matched those of my wife. I was frustrated and terrified in equal measure by the innocence of Rowan's friend, the ignorance. The problem wasn't simply that Jo hadn't read the letter. It was that she didn't feel what Rowan and I felt. Though my wife and I had been jubilant on that first day in our new home, our property had been pre-furnished with a weighty blanket of darkness. Something I'd read in Rowan's eyes, and I'm sure she must have read it in mine. "You took your time," Joanne giggled, piercing my heart with fright for the 3rd time. "It made me laugh, seeing you run upstairs after her. Did Rowan need your fashion tips, Owen?" "Something like that," I whispered, hurriedly handing the dress to my wife's friend. "Are you okay back there, Rowan?" Joanne smiled, peering at my wife, who timidly stepped out from behind me. "Come over shy all of a sudden? Now I'm starting to think you coy lovers did get up to something. Ah, to be young again. Anyway, thank you very much, sweetheart. You're an absolute lifesaver. In this dress, I'm sure to catch the eye of—" Joanne was interrupted. Not by knocking on the door, not by the disappearance of lights in the house, not by any ominous sign I expected. She was interrupted by spontaneous choking, prompted by nothing that made sense. "Joanne!" Rowan gasped, rushing forward. My wife managed to catch her frightened friend in outstretched arms. Tears swam in Joanne's eyes as her legs buckled and she gasped for air. Then Rowan started to perform the Heimlich maneuver as snot spilled from Joanne's nostrils. And I contended with the terror of witnessing somebody die. Several excruciating seconds later, with the slight crunch of Joanne's ribcage splintering, a vile stream of bile released from the back of her throat. And in the mess, which spread in a festering pool on the floor, there floated a crumpled piece of paper. Being the only non-squeamish member of the trio, and noting that the other two were still recovering from the trauma of Joanne's sudden fit, I knelt to pluck the note from the lake of vomit. It bore neat printed lines of text in a minute font. After I scraped a streak of sick away, 2 sentences became legible. "Expulsion notice. Please exit through the basement." I read the note aloud, whilst Joanne continued to splutter, and my wife eyed me with confusion. So, I read the note again, and again. Joanne looked twice as perplexed as Rowan. I understood, of course. Understood that none of it seemed rational. We did not have an explanation for the note's mysterious arrival. Joanne hadn't swallowed the slip of paper. It had simply emerged at the top of her throat, corking her trachea. Not in an attempt to end her, clearly, given the note's second sentence. "Please exit through the basement," Joanne screamed as she flung the front door open. It revealed not the front porch, but the kitchen. The back door of the house opened onto the front entryway. Windows opened onto the interiors of various other rooms throughout the house. This was the case not only for Joanne, but for Rowan and me, too. We were all doomed to the same fate, trapped in a looping maze, and the horror of our predicament was unavoidable. We had one option. What happens if we listen to it? If we exit through the basement? My wife whispered. "What is happening?" Joanne wailed, barely registering anything. I shakily answered. "You laughed, Joanne. I don't know why, but it's wrong." "What are you saying?" The woman shrieked tearfully, snot still staining her face. How did that appear in my throat? I don't... We don't understand it either, Rowan whispered, holding her friend's hand whilst turning to me. But we have to try the basement. It's the only room we've avoided. I gulped, nodding, and Joanne sobbed whilst I led the two of them to the door. It opened with a slight creak, and I should have breathed a sigh of relief at seeing the basement's darkened staircase rather than a portal to another room in the house. But there was no wave of euphoria, only that blackened tide of fear rolling towards my mind, threatening something worse than an end. I was haunted by the idea that death might be a kinder fate than whatever lay below. I guided us into the darkness, taking fragile steps and spinning my head frequently to ensure that Rowan and Joanne remained behind me. Once we reached the lightless basement floor, the door at the top of the stairs loudly closed, and I fumbled for the light switch, but it was gone. There seemed to be nothing down there. None of our unpacked boxes, no shelving units, nothing. Just an empty, unlit room, a black expanse. "What now?" Joanne timidly asked. "I have no idea," I replied. "We should look for an exit," Rowan said. "This is the exit," I pointed out. "That's what the note said." "No," Joanne said. My wife agreed. "Joe's right. There must be more to it than that. No," Joanne repeated, interrupting her more forcefully. "Joe, are you okay?" Rowan asked, shuffling around and grabbing my arm. "Is that you?" "No, it's me," I said, taking my wife's hand. "I thought you were holding on to Joanne." "No, Joe, where are you?" she queried fearfully. No, Joanne sobbed, her voice and presence seeming to grow more distant. And then came laughter. Not a kind laugh, not a laugh of joy, not even a mocking one. It was a laugh devoid of soul, devoid of life, one that seemed to serve simply as the welcome to some eternal nightmare, one that Joanne seemed to be blindly walking towards, willfully or not. I clutched at air or a void with my free hand, desperate to find her, but she was gone. "Stop it!" Joe cried, sounding far too distant for such a compact basement. "Why are you laughing? Show yourself. Who's there? Where are... Oh God, no! What are you? What are you?" My wife's friend screamed as she saw something in the dark, something that Rowan and I did not see, something I know was too terrible for living eyes, as Joanne had perished. I'm not sure how I knew that. I simply understood that she would not return to the land of the living. I understood that she was not simply exiting Brave Row. She was exiting reality, and she would not be entering some joyous afterlife. I did not doubt that a hellish, torturous eternity awaited. Squeaking wood sounded, and I rotated my head. Rowan and I had only walked a few steps from the staircase, but it was inexplicably 100 yards behind us. The open door at the top of the stairs cast light from the lobby. It was the only visible thing in the void which had swallowed Joanne, the void that still threatened to swallow Joanne and me. "Come on!" I yelled, dragging my wife behind me. As we darted towards the escape, I started to feel something more physical in the absence of the room, a manifestation of the dark tide that had been approaching my mind. Joanne whimpered incoherently from a place both near and distant. It's... Owen! Rowan cried as we reached the stairs. "We have to..." "Go!" I ordered, pushing my wife onto the first step. "Please, Owen," she begged. "There must be something, some way to save her." I turned for a moment and immediately felt a searing pain in my brain. That black tide had finally arrived, washing away all the joy in my soul, bringing not suffering but the promise of suffering. It was a warning from whatever lay in the deepness of that basement. Whatever thing, outside of the HOA, enforced the rule. Rowan and I had obeyed that rule. Joanne had not. My wife and I were being offered safe passage from the terror. We were on the stairs, mere yards away from safety. But I considered it for a moment, considered what my wife had said. There had to be a way of saving Joanne. In the place that defied all spatial laws, I still felt the presence of Rowan's friend. Felt her cries burrowing deeply into my ears, as distant as they sounded. I realized that the place was a trick. She might only be yards from us. I could do something. But the Watcher read my thoughts. Read my intent to plunge into the darkness and rescue the poor woman. That likely would have broken some other unspoken rule, for a hand stretched from the black. And it did not belong to Joanne. It was a skeletal, six-fingered appendage, cloaked in ragged, ripped strips of gray skin. It was not skin at all, of course, just as the hand was not a hand. It was not anything that belonged to anyone. Worst of all, I know it did not even belong to the Watcher. The hand was a tool used to make its point. If I had seen even a sliver of that thing's true form, I would have been broken like Joanne. Whatever enforced the rule of joyless evenings in Bravaro did not come from anywhere earthly. And it did not take Joanne anywhere earthly, I screamed, backing away from the fingers as they sought to snatch me. Perhaps by returning to the dark and searching for Joanne, I would have faced the same horrible doom. But I didn't allow myself to find out. I narrowly swerved the fingers and followed Rowan clumsily up the stairs before slamming the door behind us. The two of us ran to the front entrance, and Rowan pushed down the handle to reveal a wonderful sight. Our porch. Our driveway, more importantly. We did not stop to pack. Did not stop to think. We bundled into the car, drove away from Bravaro, and promised never to look back. A few days have passed, and we've decided not to return to collect our things. Even at the sun's high point of the day, I wouldn't risk uttering even the slightest giggle in Bravaro. Besides, there are things worse than material loss, things worse than death even. But I never gazed at those things, and I pray I never will. I pray for something truly awful in truth. I wish that Joanne had died before seeing whatever she saw.